Thank you for joining me today as we discuss the evolution of the individual field ration since 1877. Let's get started. A well-fed soldier is a happy and lethal soldier. I know this from firsthand experience through my time in the army. In fact, the great commander Napoleon remarked, "The soup makes the soldier." While there are many ways we can approach the topic of military rations, from garrison chow to field rations and the emergency ration, my focus today will cover how the individual field ration evolved since 1877 into the meal ready to eat, better known as the MRE. To preview the heavy hitters of today's topic, we will see the lack of individual field rations at the turn of the century and the iron ration of World War I. World War II created a need for innovation, and that it brought with the D, C, and K rations among many, many others. The Korean and Vietnam Wars relied on the surplus from the Second World War and created the MCI. Lastly, in 1981, we saw what we have in my hands right now, the MRE in all its packaged goodness. To set the stage, post-Civil War, there was no official field ration in sight. However, tinned meat and vegetables went into circulation with an improving canning industry. These were mainly used as a travel ration for railroad journeys where troops could not build fires for cooking. In the mid-1890s, the Army wanted a field ration called the Emergency Reserve Haversack or Marching Ration. So what were the criteria? Compactness, being lightweight, and the use of normal food. Naturally, the Army messed it up and said its soldiers would run on compressed bread, known as hardtack and cooked bacon. But this led to food poisoning due to poor packaging. A slight modification led to uncooked bacon and hardtack next, with over half the calories coming from fat. Even then, it wasn't a true emergency ration since it required cooking. Hardtack, for those of you who do not know, is essentially a rock that has been known to break teeth. It is a bread devoid of all moisture and flavor for preservation purposes. For the Spanish-American War in 1898, there was no emergency individual packaged ration at this time. Troops relied on the garrison ration. At the turn of the century, the Congressional Act of 1901 authorized the president to prescribe the components and quantities of the Army ration. Hence, the Army created its first emergency ration in the same year so soldiers could carry food for use in the event they were isolated from supply. In 1907, the Army drew inspiration from the early days of the Indian campaigns in the Southeast. American officers noted that the Mexicans and Indians on horseback relied on beef jerky and pinole, which is parched and ground wheat or corn. Both items lacked any moisture and lasted for months on end. 3 ounces of beef, 6 ounces of pinole, and 3 ounces of chocolates were assembled in a small, flat, vacuum-sealed tin that slid in one's pocket. It weighed 1 whole pound and contained 1,200 to 2,500 calories, which were meant to hold on troops for a few days at a time. Fun fact is that when the Americans sought the capture of Pancho Villa in Mexico, the chocolate sadly melted in the heat. The concept of hot chow and potable water delivery to the front lines was pioneered in World War I. In fact, the World War I American troops were named doughboys, believed to be based on how often they received freshly baked bread. They were the best fed army in the world with many luxuries such as milk, butter, candy, and cigarettes, a soldier's favorite. However, there was still a need for a reserve ration, trench ration, and emergency ration. The reserve ration was individually packed and could feed a soldier when field chow from the cooks was unavailable. It consisted of 1 pound can of corned beef, 2 8-ounce tins of hardtack, sugar, coffee, and salt. Weighing around 2 pounds and providing 3,300 calories, soldiers considered it satisfying, but not practical due to the packaging and cylindrical cans. The tins were needed to protect the food against the nastiness of trench warfare, gas attacks, and vermin. Next, another ration was developed. The trench ration fed 25 troops and contained many of the same items in the reserve ration along with alcohol and cigarettes. The emergency ration, also known as the armor or iron ration, was used at the same life as a last resort, an emergency. The oval-shaped can contained 3 3-ounce chocolate bars and 3 3-ounce cakes, which were a mixture of beef powder and cooked wheat and fit in a pocket. Sounds absolutely appetizing. The Army assembled 2 million of these rations to be used in France and discontinued the item in 1922 after the war. Between the wars, the Quartermaster Corps was assigned to further develop the ration in 1920. In October of 1922, the War Department approved a new reserve ration with 16 ounces of meat, 14 ounces of hard bread, 6 ounces of soluble coffee, granulated sugar, and extract tablets. With the threat of war looming over, the beginning of modern ration research began. In 1936, the Quartermaster Subsistence Research and Development Lab started up and produced 2 new rations, the Field Ration D and C. Now let's discuss the rations available during World War II and how they were used. First, the field rations A and B were fresh and frozen, prepared by cooks in garrison. There were also rations that were 10 and 5-in-1 packages, but they required cooking equipment, so I won't cover them as much as other specialty rations listed below. First, the most famous and widely used ration from World War II to Vietnam, the Ration Combat Individual, better known as the C ration, resulted from pre-war attempts to produce a stable, palatable, and nutritionally balanced ration with 3 meals per day. In 1936, the Quartermaster's first batches were horrendous, grossly low in micronutrients, and due to a math error, had half the expected calories. They must have had the cooks doing the math. This is very on par with the military's great minds, but as I was. The first director of the new Subsistence Research Lab, Major W.R. McReynolds, started his development of the C ration in 1937. He rolled out a 16-ounce 6-can system, 3 meat with vegetable units and 3 bread units to replace the reserve ration in 1938. After field trials in 1940, soldiers complained that the cans were too bulky. The meat lacked variety, it was too rich, contained too many meats, but it was nutritionally adequate and, quote, one of the best field rations ever issued to the Army. To alleviate complaints, the Army ditched the 16-ounce can for a slimmer 12-ounce can, reduced the number of biscuits, and added chocolate as well as coffee. Altogether, it provided almost 3,000 calories, over 100 grams of protein, and plenty of micronutrients. Changes in 1941 added candy full of vitamin C. The reason for the addition of the candies was vitamin C consumption rates. The C ration initially contained lemon juice powder, dubbed bug juice, because soldiers would rather bleach the floor with it rather than drink it. I find it funny that we still refer to juice from field chow as bug juice. On to production. The U.S. procured 1.5 million C rations in August 1941. Later versions in World War II contained the main course of franken beans, ham and eggs, potatoes, pork and beans, or chicken and vegetables as options. Canned fruit, chewing gum, chocolate, coffee, toilet paper were on the side, and for dessert, cigarettes, again, a soldier's favorite. The C ration evolved many times over the next 40 years, with the following versions called C2, C3, and C4, until it was discontinued with the advent of the MRE in 1981. It will be forever remembered as well-balanced, fresh, bulky, and heavy. Next, the Field Ration D, which I dubbed the chocolate brick, was first considered to be the real emergency ration. To start, Colonel Paul P. Logan, the head of the Subsistence School, worked on its development from 1933 to 1937, and it was originally named after him, the Logan Bar. So what were the goals of the ration? The Army wanted a calorically dense, small package that retained sufficient palatability to be used daily. The Field Ration D was a chocolate bar with high melting point of 120 degrees and provided 600 calories. In each ration, there were 3 4-ounce bars, therefore 1,800 calories. These 4-ounce bars were wrapped in aluminum foil and overwrapped and sealed in parchment paper. It was convenient and versatile. It could be called upon as the first emergency ration. The D ration was intended to stop the worst of hunger aches from one missed meal, even though the goal was a meal in a ration. It was standardized in 1939 as an emergency and reserve ration and went into full-scale production in 1941 with 600,000 units. 1942 produced a whopping 117 million rations. The Army had a mountain of chocolate stockpiled it decided that none would be produced in 1943 and then 52 million in 1944. Overall, GIs found it disgusting and difficult to eat. Men were made nauseous by the bar and it had to be fortified with vitamin B1 to aid the absorption of calories. If you look at the image here, the packaging directions even advise that it be eaten slowly in about half an hour or by crumbling it into a cup of boiling water. Remember when I mentioned how it was only if a soldier absolutely needed food in place of a missed meal or two? Well, the front lines led to unpredictable situations and soldiers survived off these bricks for days on end. Wildly unpopular, they were replaced by the C and K rations. The best received ration was the K ration. Originally developed for paratroopers on combat operations, the K ration was a small, light, and packed with nutrients to feed troops for several days in the field, without other food sources. Let's start from the beginning. Mr. Keyes here, a relatively unknown physiologist, was entrusted by the Army to help develop a ration. To test his concept, he visited a grocery store and purchased 30 servings of hard biscuits, dried sausage, chocolate bars, and hard candies. A random platoon of soldiers at Fort Snelling, Minnesota, consumed the prototype immediately and absolutely loved it. The next test was at Fort Benning, which changed to Fort Moore and then recently back to Benning, funnily enough, and it is in Georgia, the home of the airborne school. The paratroopers loved the ration and the additional comfort items such as gum, cigarettes, matches, and toilet paper. At this point, I think soldiers would like any ration as long as it has cigarettes. With his findings, Keyes presented the ration to the War Department, and they wholeheartedly approved. In 1942, the ration Type K, which was named after Keyes, went into production. The K ration was packed in 8 units and provided 8,300 to 9,000 calories, 100 grams of protein, and went slightly below micronutrient guidelines. The daily rotation consisted of 3 meals: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Breakfast was a 4-ounce can of meat product, for example, chopped egg and ham, had 4 biscuits known as energy crackers, 4 compressed graham crackers, a fruit bar, 1 packet of water-soluble coffee, sugar tablets, 4 cigarettes, again, a soldier's favorite, 1 piece of gum, a can opener, toilet paper, a candy bar, and a wooden spoon. It's a lot. To me, this looks like a great, except for the cigarettes, because I don't smoke, but I am sure they have a great trading value between GIs. Dinner was the same as breakfast, except that pasteurized processed American cheese replaced the meat component. There was no fruit bar, and lemon juice powder was replaced by coffee, as well as the addition of matches in the accessory packet. The supper unit had a can of beef and pork loaf for the entree, had either a chocolate bar or caramels, and a packet of bouillon powder instead of lemon juice powder, and toilet paper for the accessory packet. Everything fit snugly into an inner box around 7 inches long, surrounded by an outer box. The meat and cheese component were in a sleeve box paired with the other items. They were sealed in a wax carton and enclosed in a non-wax outer carton. 12 rations were packed in a box and sent overseas to our troops. What's interesting is that well-known companies such as H.J. Heinz, Nescafe, Wrigley's, and others were the name brands for these items and even packaged the K rations themselves. The Army produced 1 million in 1942, 1 million in 1943, and 105 million in 1944. While the invention was to only eat the K rations for a few days at most, leaders of course misused them and many GIs survived on K rations for weeks. Because of this, troops would get tired of the items and really only use the cigarettes and candy. The usefulness of the K ration diminished at the tail end of the war to the superior C ration. It was declared obsolete by the Quartermaster Corps in 1948. To finish off Mr. Keyes' story, he ended up popularizing the Mediterranean diet and was on the cover of Time magazine in 1961 promoting regular exercise, fruits, vegetables, and fish in one's routine. which are still very good for you to this day. I found the K ration to be very simple and efficient for packing purposes. Here is an interesting first-hand account of the K ration. Paul McNellis, a decorated veteran of the Italian campaign with the 85th Infantry Division, praised the ration saying, quote, "On the line, we survived on K rations. Mules brought them up the mountains at night along with ammunition and water. We were happy to get them. C rations were better, of course. They had more of a variety like ham and beans. But we didn't get any since they were bulkier. We were being supplied by mules. If you were on the line, K rations weren't that bad. One good thing about them is that the box was impregnated with wax. There was just enough that when you set them on fire, it would warm up a cup of coffee. A buddy of mine showed me how to make toasted cheese. You open up the can, stick your bayonet in it, and hold it over the fire to melt the cheese, then put it on the crackers." Sounds good. From 1950 to 1953, the United States had troops in Korea. Troops were forced to continue eating these C rations because of the huge surplus of millions from World War II. Disgusting. Those have been saved for over 5 years at this point. Still used in Nam, the C ration remained in stock. However, the MCI was developed as discussed before. The increased variety in menus, candies, and fruits aided morale and the consumption of all items. A huge change occurred in 1972 when cigarettes were removed from the MCI. Often, the meal combat individual was mistaken for the C ration since both held canned portions and were used simultaneously. The MCI then phased out the metal tins and instead came in a cardboard box with a can of meat, ham and lima beans, or turkey loaf, for example. A can of bread, which could consist of crackers, hardtack, or cookies. A can of dessert, such as applesauce, sliced peaches, pound cake, and it contained 1,200 calories. Carrying around an entire ration could be bulky, so troops field stripped their rations. I will show you what this looks like with an MRE later. Essentially, you take the components you want and toss the rest. Lastly, in 1981, the MCI was the ration of choice for the Army until the creation of the meal ready to eat, better known as the MRE. Before I head into the MRE, here is some interesting info on the field ration guidelines that need to be addressed. According to the U.S. Army Natick Research Development and Engineering Center, which is responsible for the DoD's food program, a ration needs to be acceptable, nutritious, wholesome, producible, cheap, and sanitary. Additional military constraints are listed on the slide. Universal acceptance is important because we have soldiers from all over the country and world. They need to they have all different tastes and preferences, so we need to make sure it's universally accepted. Worldwide environments entail that it must be consumable from degrees ranging from -60 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The MRE needs to withstand the summers in the Middle East and the harsh winters of Alaska, for example. Air delivery involves rations being packaged to withstand extremely rigorous and rough handling during transportation. For weight and volume, the Army needs to maximize caloric content in the least amount of space possible. No one wants to waste space in their ruck or Vic with gear and food. The MREs need to have a long shelf life of at least 3 years. Next, having a warm meal can change the taste of food entirely and improve morale as it increases acceptance and the consumption of food. Construction of a nutritionally complete ration using pre-assembled components shows improved performance as well. Next, modularity permits tailoring of rationing systems capable of meeting a broad range of requirements through interchanging the components. Boredom's inevitable when eating in MREs day in and day out, but it can be reduced through variety from menu to menu. Lastly, the packaging needs to withstand biological and chemical threats. Now for what the Army uses and what I have seen more than my fair share of, somewhere in the hundreds. The MRE is designed to sustain a soldier during training or operations when normal field chow and garrison chow are not available. It is a self-contained operational ration consisting of a full meal packed in a flexible, lightweight meal bag weighing 1.5 pounds in total. Design work on the MRE began in 1961. It was adopted in 1975, full production started in 1980, and troops received it in 1983. Currently, there are 24 different menus. However, we only started with 12 in the 80s. Each comes with sides and an accessory packet. On average, an MRE has a little over 1,200 calories with 13% protein, 36% fat, 51% carbs, and 1/3 of the military's recommended daily allowance of vitamins and minerals. The shelf life is 3 years at 80 degrees Fahrenheit and can be extended in the cold. In 1983, we saw the first field evaluation with the 25th Infantry Division in Hawaii, where they used the MRE for 34 days, 3 times a day. I can only pray for their stomachs and how bad the latrines smelled. The Tropic Lightning Troop said the ration was acceptable. However, consumption rates were low, at only 60% of the calories being consumed. This is a major issue here. A follow-on field evaluation in 1986 was conducted in Hawaii with a newly improved MRE. The changes included replacing 9 out of the 12 entrees with new ones, increasing the entree size from 5 to 8 ounces, adding commercial candies to 4 more menus, adding hot sauce to 4 menus, and adding a cold beverage base to all. The results spoke for themselves, as both acceptability and consumption of the MRE increased. Anecdotally, most bad MREs can be fixed with hot sauce, and we received tiny bottles of Tabasco in the accessory packet for most rations. There has been continuous surveying and improvements on the MRE, especially during Operation Desert Shield and Operation Desert Storm in the 90s. The Army added freeze-dried coffee to replace spray-dried coffee, hot sauce to every MRE, thank God, wet fruit instead of dehydrated fruit, and commercial candy now in 8 out of 12 MREs. While the intention of the MRE is to be consumed for less than 10 days in a row, Desert Storm vets lasted on these bad boys for 60 days and more. A high-heat stable chocolate was made to withstand the high heat of the Middle East. In 1992, the Army included a flameless ration heating device and a shelf-stable bread. Gone are the days of hardtack and only crackers. Unfortunately, the Army uses a FIFO system for MREs if you are familiar with the accounting term. First in, first out. So the old MREs had to be used first and were 5 or more years old by the time they were used in Desert Storm. Shockingly, some command teams enforced policies where every soldier had to eat MREs, even if only one soldier had to eat MREs because of their tactical situation. Since 1991, a forum is held annually to continue further advancements of the MRE, and one of the biggest changes they made was in 1966. It was to include 2 multi-faith meals in each MRE shipping case, being kosher and vegetarian MREs. Vegans, you're out of luck, as it's not feasible to provide vegan food in the tactical environment. You get what you get and you don't throw a fit. That's just how it is sometimes. Now, each meal contains an entree, spoon, starch spread, dessert, snack beverage, hot beverage bag, accessory packet, and the flameless heater. It is currently rated to be used no more than 21 days consecutively. The longest period I have eaten exclusively MREs has been 14 days for an annual training, and let me tell you, I would rather not put my bowels through that experience again. Typically, the Army phases out 2 MREs at a time every 2 years and adds 2 new menus. A soldier likely won't physically see the changes until a year or 2 down the line when the current supply is used. On to some miscellaneous MRE information. MREs are handed out often during a natural disaster, but because of their high sodium content, a man had a heart attack during Hurricane Katrina. If you are a non-active person eating MREs consistently, just don't, because they're meant for consumption in a tactical environment where one burns calories and sweats out the high levels of sodium. To put it into perspective, 3 MREs in a day contain at most 19 grams of sodium. The American Heart Association recommends consuming no more than 2.3 grams per day for healthy patients. Military personnel recommended 5 grams per day. 19 just blows these numbers out of the water, so again, this is not meant for daily use. To conclude, it has been shown that little attempt was made from the time of 1877 till the start of World War I to provide the American soldiers with individual emergency rations. Garrison rations, consisting primarily of meat, bread, and occasionally vegetables, were used instead. This ration was intended to feed the soldier not only in garrison, but on the march, in the field, in combat, and under conditions threatening individual survival. We've seen that the military can win and survive on improper rations. However, if troops are fed poorly, their fighting efficiency will drop. Since we soldiers are not machines, not only will our ability to perform be impaired, but our will to do so decreases in proportion to food quality. The Army took note of this and ensured that we are the best fed Army in the entire world. Some might be a bit too well fed, as shown in the pictures. Complaints about rations in the MREs are a bond shared between generations of soldiers that, for better or for worse, will last the test of time. I, for one, am much more appreciative of the MRE, knowing all the developments it took to get here. The last bit is not part of my project presentation. If you want to see the components of an MRE and how I rate it, as well as other miscellaneous experiences I have had with the MRE, I will have that next up. If not, thank you for watching.